Hi there, Jodie Fitzgerald here with another interview in the series of interviews for dog owners to discover the secrets of dog experts that will transform your relationship and create the best friend you've ever wanted. Today, I have Andrew Hale here. He is definitely a dog expert he has multiple certifications in dog behavior, and has 10 years working, specializing in animal behavior, with studying and lots of qualifications. Andrew is well known for working with empathy and compassion and helping you to understand why your dog is exhibiting the behaviors that you are concerned about. And he's just so honored to have you here today. Thank you very much, Andrew.
Hey Jodie, how you doing?
Great, great. If you, everybody loves a story. If you're willing to start how you got into this journey, because dogs are a journey, and we'd love to hear how you got here now. You've got such great history and behavior.
Yeah, well, I've got a human psychology background. So for 15 years after university, I worked in human therapy, and then it took my own mother of all mental breakdowns to experience that. It just goes to show, Jodie, that just because you know about stuff doesn't make you immune to it, right? So I had my own quite big kind of breakdown, and that made me do a lot of reappraisal. And then my own therapist, as I was going through that period, his brother was, because he's retired now, a leading name in positive animal husbandry with wild animals, working in the wild and also zoo settings. So John Roberts, and I got then the chance to meet John, and I ended up then spending 18 months, 2 years with him, traveling around various zoos and wildlife parks, and working with some wonderful animals, sadly within a zoo setting. And that made me think, wow, this is really cool, and maybe I need a change in my life, and maybe there's a different direction. So there's not that many gorillas and lions around in the UK. So I just naturally drifted towards an animal that I knew, and one that I, even as a young child, had great connections with, and that's the dog, right? So that's kind of how I got into working with animals. So it took a mental health breakdown for me. That's how I shifted over. But it's been great because I've always been passionate about exploring and understanding the emotional experience. And the thing about the emotional experience, Jodie, is two very important things. First one is we all have one. You have one, I have one, your dog has one, your cat has one. Every living thing will have an emotional experience. The second thing is they're all different. So you and I, we share very similar, I wouldn't say the same, but very similar neurology, physiology, biology. That is what is the nature of what we do when we understand behavior, especially. It's all about neurology and physiology, right? But the way that you and I and anybody else listening personally interprets that feeling, sensations, the processes that our brain makes, the belief systems that we create, we can touch on some of this stuff now if you like, that becomes unique to us. That's our emotional experience. So when I started working with dogs, it was like, well, okay, this animal has an emotional experience. It has emotional needs. It needs to communicate that emotional need. And I looked around at what is being done more traditionally, and thinking, right, so where's the dog's agency in this? Where's the dog's input in this? Because a lot of what we do traditionally is about us as the human arbitrarily, unilaterally deciding what behavior is good and bad, what's inappropriate, what we need to do, what we expect, those expectations. And that's what we see a lot of, whether that's punitively or positively. We are very good at deciding that behavior is not what I want, or that's the behavior I want. But what about the dog's emotional experience underneath it? And that's what I like to explore, and that's what I talk about, and that's why people have got to know me a little bit, is because I'm having those discussions, and they're exciting ones, right?
They are. Dogs' emotions. I feel they show their emotion, and they're full of emotion. They express even body language. Body language is emotion. People need to add adding the word emotion to it.
Well, emotion is everything. This is the thing, that the emotional experience is everything. So I always like to invite people to think of this. Actually, there's only two types of behavior. The behavior that we do ourselves and the behavior that we judge in others. I just want you to think about that. We're really good as a species of being very judgmental. The brain's designed to be that. I can come on to that in a second. But so I will make a judgment on your behavior, Jodie, and I will make that judgment. And it will often be quite two-dimensional, and it will be based upon my reality and my processing of that, not necessarily your experience. That's the point. When we think about the behavior we do ourselves, however, we know it's complicated, right? We do stuff for many reasons, and our behavioral output is just an expression of all that's happened before internally in that process. So, and we make apologies for it all the time. If I was to fall out with you now, Jodie, I can't see why I would, but you never know. And then I might phone you up later and say, look, I'm really sorry, Jodie. It's because I was tired. It's because I was upset. It's because I was angry. Because I was in pain. Because I've got a lot of stress going on. We reference it better ourselves. We reference our own behavior better because it's based on our emotional experience. And when we think about that dog, the only thing the dog has to express their emotional experience and their emotional need is through their behavior. And now we might decide that we don't want it. We can judge it all we like. We can decide the dog's going to do something else. But what internal value does that have to the dog? A lot of what we train a dog has no internal value to them. They're just doing it because we can get them to do it. So this is what we have to think about. I've got my snake analogy. I'll share it with you because it's quite a good one. If you imagine somebody doesn't like snakes very much and a snake comes along, they're going to have an emotional experience around that. They're going to have a nervous system and psychological, neurological response. Stress, if you like. That in turn will affect their behavior. So that could be screaming or shouting. Now, if I decide as the calm bystander, I decide I don't like their behavior. I've decided their behavior is bad, naughty, inappropriate, whatever label I want to give it. I've only got two options now. I either treat them punitively, so I tell them off, or correct them, or punish them, which is sadly what we see a lot on telly. And I might stop the behavior, great. But I haven't changed how they feel about the snake. I haven't changed their emotional experience. I've just stopped the behavior. That's all I've done. But even using positive reinforcement, if I'm only thinking about, God, that behavior, I just don't want it. I need to get you to do something else. There is a risk that I end up getting a behavior that I find more appropriate, but still doesn't have any internal value to that situation, still doesn't help their emotional experience around the snake. So we have to see behavior like this a little bit more. We've become very good as an industry at looking to how we change behavior in an arbitrary way. And that's what I call the operant merry-go-round. That might not be the operant term, might not be one that some of you listeners know, but that just means how we change behavior through, whether the animal feels reinforced or punished, or whether the behavior is more likely or less likely. The problem is, though, what we haven't looked at enough is why the dog was doing it in the first place. Or the most important word in the psychology of behavior, in my opinion, is the word relief. What relief the animal was seeking in the first place. So let's just take a dog who pulls on the lead. For anybody, any of your kind of carers listening in, there's 101 ways to try and stop a dog pulling on a lead. Some of them nice, some of them not so much. There's 101 tools out there to help you do it. But what if the dog was pulling because they had generalized anxiety in the environment? What if they're pulling because they're being triggered by the traffic? What if they're pulling because they have issues around struggling with self-regulation and through overexcitement? If we don't address the core issues for the animal, then all we're doing is getting them to do something arbitrarily because we want them to. So it's just rethinking stuff, that's all. And it's not saying to people that's wrong, that's right. These conversations are just asking for people to listen and find their own truths through that. But behavior is more complicated than just an output. And that's why when we think about our own behavior, we know that's true. And we can all remember a time, because this is the irony, Jodie, we all like to judge, but we all hate to be judged. Right? And we can all remember a time when our behavior was judged externally, that we were put under restraint, coercion, control to act in a certain way. A lot of our school memories will be that. But sadly, some people have that in their relationships. They have that with their parents, or whatever it is, or even in the workplace. So we know what that feels like, right? And I call it finding alignment. The dog will have an emotional experience that's underneath that behavior. We also will have an emotional experience about what that behavior does to us. Many carers will, if you've got a dog who barks and lunges at other dogs, they will feel shame, they will feel embarrassed, they will feel judged. So they know what they're feeling, so they have an emotional experience, and my job is to make sure I factor that in. But the animal is also having an emotional experience. When we think back to the snake analogy, the problem isn't their behavior, it's how they feel about the snake. That's the problem. It's how that dog feels in that situation. So we as practitioners then, we need to try and find some alignment between the emotional care needs of the dog and the carer.
Yeah.
For too long, it's all been about trying to shift the dog's behavior to fit a model that's more appropriate for us as the human. But we hear the same stories in child psychology and child development, Jodie. It's very similar tension there.
Yes, yes, yes. I know. Of course, my pen doesn't work. I wanted to write that down. I'm going to have to watch this again. You're just saying so much amazing stuff. It is about alignment and coming to understand what the dog is, being open to understanding what the dog is feeling, and to being open to your own feelings about it, and understand that the dog didn't do that just to piss you off. The dog is doing it for a reason, and you can take a look back and see why the dog is, is it tearing apart the garbage because you've been too busy to do anything all day with them? And yeah, it's feeling other needs that the dog would have. It's so important.
And those are really important points there, because what we have to recognize, if we just step back a little bit and just look at things more widely, all of our behaviors come from what the brain has decided is going on. Now, this is very important. So I gave a talk the other night, and at the beginning of the talk, I played Barbie Girl by Aqua. I'm a Barbie girl. The reason I played that is because it just reminded us that we don't actually listen with our ears, we listen with our brain. So it's our brain that's decided what value is put onto that song and what our judgments are about that song, and the stereotypes that we might put around a certain piece of music. Who would listen to that, right? Who would buy that, right? So this is very important. This is the role of belief systems. So the brain takes on all this information all the time through something called sensory integration. And it would be exhausting if it had to cognitively reevaluate everything all the time. So it likes to compartmentalize stuff and to put things in certain places. And that creates a belief system, right? So what do I believe? Because it's nice and easy for the brain then. And then to protect that belief system, we have all these cognitive biases that they're like belief filters to try and protect that belief system. And when we have that belief system, if we're not aware of it, if we don't give ourselves a chance to cognitively reappraise, we end up creating a judgment system based on that belief system, which then creates expectations, which then, when those expectations aren't being met, we seek to either get away from that situation or try and change, control, or coerce. And then the final step is we will then create language to be able to do that. So when we think about then our clients, I recognize that the majority of people, when I first meet them, their belief system, and when I look at this without the judgment on that, because I know it's just the way it is about the zeitgeist, the dominance model, the fact that their dog's behavior should be this, should be that. That's their belief system. They've got cognitive biases to support that. That leads to the expectations that they're now projecting onto their dog. Now that those expectations aren't being met, they have a desire to be able to control, change, or coerce, and then they create the language to support that. My dog's being naughty, my dog's being bad, my dog, whatever. So understanding these mechanics is hugely important, because there's no point me going in and saying, you're really doing that to your dog, or that's really silly, or we don't talk like that anymore. Because already for many people, their belief system's already firing up and saying, right, I'm going to push that away, what you're saying, because my cognitive biases are going to push that away. So actually, making the whole focus on methods and tools, in my opinion, we're kind of losing people. So when I first meet a client, for example, this is just how I do stuff. I'm going to be, the first thing I'm going to say is find out from the client, what is it that you're experiencing? What are you going through? And that's great for their own belief system, because they're like, oh, somebody's listening to me. They're listening to my truth as I see it. And they might use words, they might tell me things they're doing, and I'm going to listen to that. I'm not going to say, oh no, we don't use the word dominant anymore. I'm just going to let them say it, whatever they need to say, because that's their truth, that's their belief system.
Yeah.
Then I'm going to explore the emotional experience in a neutral way. I'm going to use my analogies that I use, like for processing. The two important parts of the emotional experience are how your brain processes stuff and what your nervous system does. The nervous system is the stress system, and everything boils down to the combination of those two things, right? So I'm going to use my analogies that I talk through and give them some points of reference so they can think, oh, I get that. So I've got my doors of the brain analogy for processing, that we need as many doors open as possible to safely, calmly, and rationally process what's going on, but recognize that stress and pain are big door closers, because we all know that, right? So, and then using the good old bucket analogy for the nervous system, because if you imagine the stress system is the empty bucket, the water in the bucket is how much stress the dog's carrying, or we're carrying. The fuller the bucket, the less doors we have open, the less chance of a rational response, the more chance of an emotional reflexive response. So then I give them that, and they're like, okay, that's interesting, because so far I've managed to navigate some of their belief filters. Then I can say, right, so when we think about what you said about you, then your bucket must have been pretty full, right, when that was happening, or you know, and they're like, yeah, it was. Now I can introduce Rover and say, right, what do we think might be happening for Rover then? And then they're already joining the dots. I haven't had to threaten them. I threaten their belief system. They're like, yeah, actually, my dog was pretty stressed, right? My dog's bucket was pretty full. So I'm inviting them to try and navigate some of that belief system and their cognitive bias. And that's why these discussions are really important, Jodie, because we have to start ourselves from recognizing, is my truth about what my dog's experiencing, is that their emotional experience?
Yeah.
And as a practitioner, I need to make sure when I turn up that my judgments and my truths don't cloud the thing. I've got my cake analogy, which is, because we all love cake, right? So always remember to take cake. That's what I say to people. So CAKE, the acronym is compassion, awareness, knowledge, empathy. So I'm going to come and meet somebody whose belief system potentially is a complete 180 to mine. So there's potential for friction, and this is why we end up polarizing in the dog world, polarizing in politics. So I need compassion to start. Compassion's always a great start, which is like, you know, regardless of my feelings, regardless of my truth, I'm going to show you compassion. I'm going to be available to you. Then awareness. I need to become aware of your truth. I need to become aware of this situation that isn't based on my own biases, but on what is kind of happening. Then knowledge. I need to bring knowledge. Obviously, I need to have my own knowledge, but also that knowledge is about learning your truth, learning the truth that is exhibiting for you as the carer, and also trying to learn that dog's emotional experience, what that truth might be for that dog. And then that final one is empathy. It gives me a chance to have that empathetic approach, which is right, okay, even some of that truth, even some of that story that I might find difficult, I'm going to have empathy anyway, and we're going to work through this. And by having that cake, it stops me from turning up and having my own judgments and biases, because it's hard. And I'm the most judgy person out there, Jodie, right? Instinctively, because we are, right? And the most important thing about this as well, is to recognize that all this stuff I'm talking about is just because of how our brain is. Mm-hmm. So it's no wonder we fall into that trap. It's really easy and quick to make a judgment in the moment because the brain likes it. It's not a character flaw. The brain doesn't want to have to keep having to cognitively reappraise everything, because it would be exhausting and it would take a lot of energy and it would be a nightmare. So the brain is like, you know what, this is what I believe now. But if you push people, or this is where the role of language, we were talking about this off air, is absolutely vital, because I have to think about the language I use to try and help that person's belief system, their truth, to shift slightly, invite that process so that they can think, actually, my dog isn't being a bit of a-hole. My dog is telling me I need help.
Yeah.
Right, I get that. But one last point on this for any
Okay.
practitioners listening. We cannot, in my opinion, be responsible ultimately for that outcome. Because there's always three types of people when we think about this. There are those whose belief systems intrinsically match our own or close to it. And that's great. And they're the best clients in the world, right? Because they're already seeing it, they're feeling it, they're getting it. On the other end of that spectrum, you've got people whose belief system is a complete 180. They're the ones who see their dog as bad. They believe in the dominance model, that there has to be a consequence, right? That's what people ask. You know, there's got to be my dog's being bad. And then you have the spectrum in between. The people this end, whilst we try and work these things through, some people, that time in that process, they're not able to shift that belief system. It's not a criticism of them, or should we have it as a failing for us? It's just they're not ready to hear it. But the vast majority of people are in the middle, and especially those people who are over this side, who think they know what dogs are about, think they know, think they believe what they saw on the telly. We have to be really careful with them, because we can help them into this. But if we use the wrong language, or we fire up those cognitive biases, we're likely to lose them. So this is just the psychology of stuff, Jodie, and it's important. I'm going to be running some little mini courses on this soon for professionals, because it's a part that isn't necessarily available to us educationally. But actually, if we step back, it is everything, right? All this stuff is important.
Well, and you know what, I do believe in planting seeds. You know, and it's proven, you know, people can change their minds and go a different. I mean, we watched dog training change so much over the years. So, you know, who knows what I feel it's a very exciting time for dogs, and who knows where it's going to be in 10 years from now. And one of the, sorry.
Yeah. No, I was agreeing with you. Yeah, 100%. No, I agree with that.
I was just going to say one other thing that you know, really when this just comes to mind often, how with communicating with people, what I understand is about 75% of what I say to you is not necessarily interpreted the way I'm intending. And it's the same with dogs. I mean, if imagine that, if it's that difficult with our own species, you know, how much more difficult it is for animals to understand what we want of them and what we're trying to say. It's very complicated.
It's very complicated. And this comes back to this point about internal value. So anything anybody's heard me say today that has internal value for them, they're more likely to think about and remember. I invite everybody to think back to their school days. If you've gone through a structured educational experience, which the vast majority of us have, in other words, school, I invite people to think back to what they remember from school. There will be very little from the structured academic experience. They might remember their times table and how to make a nice quiche and make a wooden ashtray or whatever that might be. But the vast majority of what they remember will have come from experimental learning, not structured learning, stuff that had internal value to them, how they deal with authority, how they connect socially, how they felt about their sense of self, how they felt about fitting in, how they felt about the opportunity to be able to learn safely. Those things are what add value. When we think about the arbitrary nature of traditional dog training, and it's still the norm, whether it's positive or punitive, it doesn't matter, how much of what we are teaching the dog has internal value to them? Or are we just getting them to do something because we can? And I think when I work with my dogs, the dogs that I work with, I do very little in the way of structured training. I'm very much being led by the dog. I'm doing loads of observations. I'm trying to find behaviors that I'm observing are innately useful to the dog anyway. The things that they would do if that bucket wasn't too full, if they had more doors open. And if I'm going to reinforce anything, and of course we use reinforcement as opposed to punishment. Punishment in itself deliberately will do nothing for the animal's emotional experience. This is why we don't have to have arguments about why shot collar's bad. It's like, well, if we could ask the dog, I think they'd tell us. Like, we don't have to worry about the science of it. But
I just
even
hate collars, never mind a shock collar, you
well,
know?
exactly, that's the point. Everything. So if we're going to reinforce anything, let's try and reinforce the behaviours that the dog has added, internal value for. And my argument, when you think about, we all know this, that young dogs, puppies, we teach them stuff, and then they kind of forget that training as they go through adolescence. And it's always been pitched as of, well, that's the adolescence process. But maybe it's also because what we've taught them has now added no internal value for them. So why would the brain, when it's going through flux and going through all those changes and adaptations, want to hold on to half of that stuff? Because it doesn't have much value to the dog, actually. So I think we just have to start thinking about these things in a different way and having this stuff. But my passion, like I said right at the beginning, is exploring the emotional experience, because that's the one thing that helps us to get alignment, because we all have one and we all recognize how unique it is and how complicated that is. And if we start educating caregivers more about the emotional experience in their dog, and in turn themselves, and also giving people more, especially professionals, more education in the psychology of what's happening in these contexts, that's how we get ultimately the best outcomes for everybody. And I say best outcomes, Jodie, it's very important, because I'm not saying the perfect outcome or the gold standard outcome. It's the best outcome that we can get based upon all these complicated factors. Again, the more traditional approach to dogs kind of says to us, oh, if you do it well, it happens quickly and you'll get this guaranteed result. That's just not real.
It's so interesting, definitely this journey of these interviews has completely altered my feeling on training, like, being rigid and stuff. I'm very happy that I've always believed in, like, if they're not having fun, we're not doing it, right? It's just, I'll switch it, I just, it to me, it's always been about the dog. And like I said, Kim Brophy, I mean, the way she explained it, is just fantastic. And I do know that I've spent a lot of time with people just like in the home, just getting that set up, I feel, is the priority. Just living together, just learning the basics of all that, and all this other stuff can be very fun. And believe me, my dogs wait, they love to do stuff but they want to do it with me. It has to do with the relationship. It hasn't to, it's really nice. It's nice when they want to do things with you. And it's funny, like, even without treats, right? Like, they'll do this guy would do a whole agility course without, I don't need a treat. He just loves it,
That's
and
important. And
we
Kim
do lots
talks a
of
lot
sense
about
stuff too, like it's looking at other things too, but it just really gave a different view of it.
And Kim's amazing. If anybody hasn't read Kim Brophy's book, Meet Your Dog, it's highly recommended. And Kim, she's an applied ethologist, and she has a great view on what Mother Nature has equipped these wonderful animals with already. And also the fact that, remember the difference between structured learning and experimental learning. Kim and I talked about this on a recent chat that we had, which you can see in the dog centered care group. If anybody wants to have a look at that, we can talk about that in a minute. But we do a lot of structured training, sit down, come stay, the kind of things that we do. The stuff that our dogs do really quick is the stuff that they've learned experimentally. Oh my God, it's pick the leash up. Oh my God, when Dad does this, this, and this, that's going to happen. Or when Dad speaks to me in that sort of tone, we're going to do this. And I haven't spent hours training all that stuff. It's just that through the connection, through that experimental learning, something that has internal value. I keep coming back to that, Jodie. It's a psychological expression that's very important, because my dog has real internal value to that. Some of the other stuff I might ask them to do through training, they're like, oh, I'll do that for a cookie, or I'll go through that because that's what Dad wants. But the stuff the dog really does, and does it almost 100% actually, is the stuff they really have internal value for. And it's just about us recognizing that the training model itself, as it's been presented traditionally, has been selling us a bit of a lie, because we can say, oh yeah, we can get the dog to do this, therefore we can do it. The voice we haven't heard enough of is the dog's.
Yeah.
And I like what you said earlier about dogs are waiting. They're kind of waiting for us humans to catch up, right? They're like, come on, we're telling you stuff. Come on, work it out. But like, again, we discussed earlier, we're not very good at understanding our own emotional needs, let alone that of another species or even another person, because even our own emotional needs can often be overlooked.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, it's definitely not the quick fix that so many people think. It's, you know, when the dog is like I said, they're right there waiting. It's such an
Mm.
exciting conversation. It is. It's an exciting time for dogs because, you know, emotion, I mean, they feel their emotion. I do believe that all animals, you know, have some sort of emotion, and dogs are sitting there waiting to connect. He doesn't like the computer. Well, come on,
Think about that
Herbie.
is when we think about that, just as a final note, really, emotions and feelings, we have to have them. They're not even under any question, really, because the brain takes on all this information, processing. The brain's obsessed with outcome. Two things specifically for us social animals. One is connection. It seeks connection. And also safety. It needs to feel safe. It's preservation. You know, the brain is trying to keep us alive. But once the brain's worked that out, what does it do? It can't do anything unless it makes you feel something. Because that's the call to arms. You need to feel hungry, thirsty, scared, excited, frustrated. You have to feel something. There's a great book called Pain is Your Friend. And this is talking about emotional pain. And one of the problems we have when we're young and we're trying to communicate emotional need, and we feel the emotions, and the number of young children who are like, I've got a bad tummy. They don't have a bad tummy, they're just feeling stress. We shut down that. So by the time me as a human therapist sees you at 30, 40 years old, you're already seeing all these emotions and feelings as somehow things that are overwhelming and difficult. But we need to listen to them because they're there to tell us something. In the same way, if you've got toothache, it's telling you you need to have some self-care. So yeah, I think that's a good point to kind of finish on, really, is that the fact that science hasn't been very good at identifying or proving core emotions and feelings in animals, that just comes back to what we talked about right at the beginning, which is the emotional experience is unique to us anyway. I couldn't tell you what. That's the reason I played the Aqua Barbie girl thing, because those arrangement of noises will mean different things to different people. There is no, maybe there is universal consensus on that particular song. There might be, but that's the point. I think it's not a huge leap to think, as a fellow mammal, I kind of know what it feels like to be nervous, anxious, scared, not be able to give consent, to feel trapped. And I can kind of see that my dog would probably feel the same things. It's not anthropomorphizing to think that another living species might actually feel something, because it has to. If it didn't, it wouldn't be able to function.
They do. Yeah, that's very good. My other analogy for working with, you know, trying to force things on any dogs at all. And with I don't know, I like to just like think of this one that if you know, I'm terrified of haunted houses. If you threw me in a haunted house and shut the door, like I would be a mess.
Mm.
And I picture dogs being in that state of emotion sometimes. And yeah, we want to help that not do that. You
Yeah,
know, and the
100%.
more that they're not in that state, the better it gets. And I believe in the possibilities, and that the dogs are waiting. Your dog.
And using that in the doggy sense, that it's okay for me to not have to think I must get Jodie to come to love haunted houses.
Yeah.
Maybe I need to help you to not go in them. And I think that's okay too. We don't have to. There's a lot of notion that somehow we have to counter condition everything that a dog might find difficult without thinking. Actually, when you talk about the quick fix is thinking, my dog goes really nuts when he's on the beach, so I think I might just avoid the beach. It's not a cop out. It's just being a good carer.
Yeah.
And it's the easiest thing to do, right?
Yes, be open to the possibilities of, you know, different things, and yeah, and learning. Wow, it's such a great conversation. All right, I'll stop recording. Thank you so much,
Thank you,
Andrew.
Jodie.
I just really appreciate this.